Scott Lauber covers the Phillies for the Inquirers, Philly.com, Daily News. He joins us now. The Boardwalk Honda Hotline is we get closer to Christmas, Scott. A lot of people thought they would already have presents under their tree.
Sure.
Andrew McCutchen, what level of present would you describe him as? Is he the socks and underwear? Is he that great new toy? I mean, where are you putting him on the list of asks?
Socks and underwear might be a little underselling him, but he's certainly not. He's certainly not the present that you wake up in the morning and you run downstairs and you tear open the box and you're jumping for joy when you get it. Because I guess if we were talking about Andrew McCutchen circa 2014, 2013, you would feel that way. He was an MVP candidate every year, it seemed like, for 4 or 5 years. Running there with the Pirates. And, you know, at one time when we looked at this free agent class and we looked ahead and projected, a lot of people felt the same way about Andrew McCutchen that you feel about Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. He was supposed to be part of this humongous class, and he remains a productive player. He's a helpful player for any team, but it feels more like a supporting actor piece right now rather than a leading man, and I think you're still looking for your leading man. You're still looking for the centerpiece of your lineup, and you know Manny Machado's coming to town on Thursday for a recruiting visit here, and you know I don't think you can overstate what that means to the franchise to be able to bring him in here and try to sell him on coming here.
Yeah, well, let's dig into McCutchen a little bit here because obviously, as you mentioned, he was an MVP candidate last year. 255, 20 homers. He got a 3-year deal. It's a little backloaded. Is this to me? It just feels like the deal that somewhere in the middle of next year, you're going to be like, this guy's still around here for another year and a half. Like I liked all the things you said. MVP candidate, seems like a great guy. I just don't know that he really has much. I don't know. I could be wrong. Do you think he has a lot left in the tank? I mean, it looks like to me they got an outfield version of Carlos Santana here.
They did in a lot of ways in terms of style of play and what they expect him to bring to the lineup. That's actually a pretty good way of looking at it because what they value in McCutchen are things like his ability to work at bat, his ability to see a lot of pitches, reach base. These are a lot of the things that Carlos Santana, love him or hate him, did fairly well. I mean, I know he only hit 220 or whatever, but the on-base percentage was there, and he did see a lot of pitches, and he did reach base. And if you take April out of there, he actually didn't have a horrible, horrible year. He didn't have the kind of year that you're paying $20 million a year for, though, and that was the problem. And I think that, you know, from a stylistic standpoint offensively, that's a lot of what McCutchen is. He's an on-base guy who can work an at-bat and give you a professional at-bat. And, you know, as long as he's not the focal point of your offense, I think you're doing just fine. I don't know that, you know, by the middle of next year, you're already going to look back at it and say, you know, this is a horrible deal. I do know that around the game, a lot of people felt like the Phillies might have overpaid for McCutchen, and it certainly looks like they did when you look at Michael Brantley agreeing to a 2-year deal for $32 million total with the Astros. And he's 31 years old and, you know, has a lot of the same attributes that from the opposite side of the plate that McCutchen does. I think what the Phillies paid for were a few things. They paid for durability. If you look at McCutchen, he you know, he's 155 plus games a year pretty much every year. They paid for durability and a guy that they know is that they feel comfortable betting on will be able to play every day. And they're paying for his leadership. You know, a guy who was once the face of the franchise in Pittsburgh. And, you know, Clint Hurdle said last week that Andrew McCutchen's a lot like E.F. Hutton. You know, when he talks, people listen. And I think when you've got a young roster like the Phillies do, that's a good guy to have around. So if you're asking why they paid the money, I think those are some of the reasons why they felt like they could extend a little bit for Andrew McCutchen and maybe give him a little bit more money than most teams are willing to give.
Scott, are you confident in Clentac and the organization right now to utilize their position and where they're at right now? Like, I feel like they're in a spot where they're able to get Manny Machado or Bryce Harper, at least one of them, and others, as we've already seen them start to do. But, you know, Clentac came out the other day and said, I'm not going to wait for one or two guys right now in free agency. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing or it doesn't matter, but I want your thoughts on just a reassuring vote of confidence here that Clentac and the rest of the crew are going to be able to really utilize their position, whether it's go after Bryce and then, go a different route for Manny and getting 3 or 4 guys in here potentially this offseason instead of just ending up landing one of them, which is still great, but it could not be ideal.
Well, look, you can't force a free agent to take your money. You can make a compelling presentation. You can make a competitive offer. And certainly the Phillies can make an offer for either of those players that is as good or better than any offer that either of them are going to get. If the Phillies really want to, they can make the best offer for Manny Machado. I don't know where they'll stop. I don't know what line they'll draw and say we're not going over this number. But they have the ability to make as good an offer as any team will make. Now, you can't force him to do that. To agree to that deal. I did a story last week where I spoke with a guy named Bobby Dickerson, who was a coach for the Orioles for a very, very long time and is probably as close to Manny Machado as any coach in Manny's career. Goes back with him to when he was 17, has worked with him forever, knows him pretty darn well. And, he kind of confirmed all the things that you hear about Machado, which is that, he loves Alex Rodriguez, right? That was his guy growing up. Has sort of always felt this tug to the Yankees. If he's going to move to third base for any team, it would be the Yankees. That's what A-Rod did. And you hear these things and you wonder, how much more are the Phillies going to have to offer to get him to come here than the Yankees? You're going to have to offer more than the Yankees do. How much more? And so I think that they're if you want to judge Matt Clentac, you can't yet because the offseason's not over. But they are involved in a lot of these guys. So I think that they realize the resources they have, financially and otherwise. They realize, unlike other off seasons in his tenure, they can be a player for just about anyone out there on the market, trade market or free agent market. And I think that they've been pretty aggressive. Now, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you can't force the guy to take your money. You can just make the best offer that you can. I think they've made good moves. Segura, I think, was a good trade, not only to bring in a good player, but also to move the Carlos Santana contract. McCutchen, as I said, I think is a good supporting actor, but they're still looking for their number one guy. And, I think that really begins, in earnest on Thursday when they make their pitch to Manny Machado.
Yeah, I know, Scott, you look at let me go back to McCutchen real fast. You mentioned that kind of an outfielding version of Santana. At this stage of his career, he was a great center fielder at one point for Pittsburgh. I guess he's more of a corner guy now. Do the Phillies view him in that mode? And adding him, does that say that we value maybe Machado more than Harper because we've already got our outfielder, and if we don't get Harper, oh well?
I don't necessarily think that. When they traded for Segura, everyone said, well, does this mean that they're more in on Harper than Machado because they just got their shortstop? I think that, I think what's clear, at least to me, is that they prefer Machado over Harper, but they're obviously interested in both players. I think they have a sense that Machado might sign first. The Scott Boras factor means that Harper probably remains free agent into January and who knows, maybe into February. So Boras kind of moves at his own pace and doesn't really pay a whole lot of attention to the calendar. And, the longer, has always sort of felt, it seems like the longer he keeps his clients out, the better chance he has to increase the market for whoever and get the best possible deal. So I think that they probably feel like Machado's going to sign first. And if Machado signs with the Yankees or somewhere else, they could always pivot to Harper. I thought it was telling today that Gabe Kapler wouldn't commit to left field or right field for McCutchen. And, one of the reasons for that is probably because, maybe Bryce Harper ends up playing right field, in which case Machado's your left fielder. Mm-hmm. if you don't get Bryce Harper, you might prefer McCutchen in right field and Nick Williams in left field. Lots of different ways you can go. So I think if they don't get Machado, they could pivot pretty easily to Bryce Harper, and depending on where Machado winds up, maybe Harper's market is affected by that. So I still think they could go either way. I do think their preferences at this point is Machado. And I think that they're going to make their full effort to try to get him here. And if they do, then I think probably McCutchen winds up in right field and they do something else with left field, whether it's Nick Williams or something like that.
Phillies reporter Scott Lauber from the Inquirer Daily News, Philly.com, and he joins us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. And, the McCutchen, signing gives them, at least a guy, as you mentioned, too, it gives them a veteran presence. This guy's a Clemente Award guy, just a good guy. You add him with Segura, how much better right now is the team, do you think? I mean, if they just said, this is it, we struck out, we got nothing else, this is who we go in with, have they improved enough for you that the fans would enter the season with some excitement?
Yeah, I think they're better. If they stop right now, I think they're better. I don't know if they're, they keep talking about wanting to be 10 wins better because they finished with 80. You figure it's going to take 90 to make the playoffs. They've stated that that's their goal, is to pick up 10 wins somewhere along the line. And I know they feel like a lot of their young players are going to take another step, whether it's Alfaro behind the plate or Nick Williams in the outfield or even another step for Hoskins, or that sort of thing. I think they still feel comfortable that a lot of their players are going to continue to get better, and they'll pick up wins that way. But I don't know that they've picked up 10 wins if they stop right now. I think that they've got more work to do, and it starts with, like I said, kind of getting that number one guy for your offense, the guy that everything is going to be centered around. I still think there's another move to be made in the bullpen. I really honestly, coming out of the winter meetings, thought you'd see Andrew Miller signed by now, maybe Zach Britton signed by now. Miller in particular seemed, from the sense that I got, seemed pretty ready to sign, and he's not signed yet. So I know the Phillies are in on him, and I don't think that that's changed. I reported last week that they've talked to the Texas Rangers about trading for Mike Minor as a pitcher they've liked for a long time. I think they like him as kind of a middle-of-the-rotation starter and a lefty who they can put in the rotation and feel, okay about. Again, not a front-of-the-rotation guy, but, a valuable piece to have. So they are looking at doing other things to, in Matt Klentak's words, continue to move the needle toward that 90 wins. And I think that, I think that they're better right now than they were at the end of last season, but they're not where they want to be. And I do wonder, after all this build-up and Machado, Harper, and stupid money and all that stuff, if they strike out on both, I do sort of wonder, how they spin that to the fans. I think it's going to be kind of a difficult spin to make. You're going to hear a lot about, Nolan Arenado and the other free agents that are on the market next winter and all of that. But, I think after all of this, if they whiff on both, and again, they can't make either of those guys take their money. They can only make their best effort to get them to come here. If neither of them wants to come here, it's going to be an interesting sort of spin to see what, how they sort of sell that.
Do you have Scott Lauber with us here, covers the Phillies for the Inquirer, Philly.com, Daily News. Do you have any issue with them then kind of refraining to spend stupid money for any of the pitchers that passed them by?
I don't think so. Look, I wouldn't have given Patrick Corbin 6 years either. And it has nothing to do with, the fact that, he's a former Tommy John guy or this or that. I just, I look at him and he's a nice pitcher and he had a really great year last year. But I wonder, coming off of one really, truly great elite year, whether, he's a guy who's going to have more of those years in his future and 6 of them, or even 4 of them or 3 of them. I mean, I wouldn't have gone as far as the Nationals did either.
Yeah.
Jay Happ was interesting to me, though. I thought he was a guy that they could have had at a reasonable term of the contract. I guess, I don't know, maybe when push comes to shove, maybe they looked at J. Happ, I'm guessing, but maybe they looked at him and figured he's not enough of an upgrade over what they already have. But, I just – Corbin, I wouldn't have gone to that length to, even though they probably could have done that and still gone after Machado or Harper. I just, if you're going to get really stupid, a 26-year-old megastar like Harper or Machado, that's the guy to get stupid for, and the only guys to get stupid for. So if they're going to really go spend, target and go all in.
Any of these pitchers that you've named here, if an opportunity comes before Machado and Harper, are the Phillies just ready to pull the trigger here, basically, with anyone outside of these two? 'Cause I just think it's such an interesting dynamic of how they're going to prioritize their signings. Because hopefully, here soon, they're going to sign multiple people, multiple players at different positions. And kind of just what Mike alluded to, I'm just afraid that they either hold off and then they gamble and they lose, essentially.
They wouldn't be the first team that's fallen into that. I mean, I think, if my memory's right on this, the Houston Astros signed Carlos Beltran to a big deal about almost 15 years ago now, and it was late in the off season, and they did it, and then they looked around and were like, well, we have this need and that need and this need that we didn't fill because, we were all in on this one guy, and I think that's why you saw them, strike early by trading for Segura and by adding McCutchen. I think they've done a nice job of adding on the around them of adding those sort of supporting pieces that you need to have and addressing other needs while maintaining the ability to still go ahead and sign Machado and or Harper. I think that if we're talking about who's left out there and what needs they have to fill, I think you can certainly go and sign Andrew Miller and still be positioned to do Machado or Harper. I think that you can trade for a pitcher. I mentioned Mike Minor. He's a guy who's making, I think, $9.5 million the next 2 years. That's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. You can certainly trade for him and still have the flexibility to go out and sign Harper or Machado. So, I don't think there's anything that they could do now that they're waiting on because they're waiting for these two guys. I think that they have positioned themselves to continue to act on some of their other needs and not take themselves out of the running for the two big fish.
Scott Lauber, don't forget, we're coming around Christmas, and I guess a lot of people get antsy. They want stuff happening, but, Scott, you mentioned, you think about last year, a lot of the big names, I mean, these guys wait now. They just kind of hang around. So would you anticipate that we're not going to see one of these two big guys sign until maybe after the new year?
That would be my guess. I mean, so, look, Machado was in Chicago yesterday with the White Sox. He's in New York tomorrow with the Yankees. He's here on Thursday. I don't know that he has any other visits planned. There's been some talk of, like, the obligatory mystery teams that are out there, and I'm sure that there are other teams that are interested. I don't know of any that are having him in just yet. But I would be surprised if it's one of those deals like he goes home, thinks about it over the weekend, and signs right before Christmas. And if you're going to not sign until after Christmas, you might as well not sign until after New Year's either, and take your time and think it through. And the other thing you got to remember about this is it's not just necessarily the player making up his mind. These are huge deals, and they involve a lot of things. I mean, there could be, no trade clauses involved. There could be deferred money. There could be opt-outs. That's a big thing these days. Players always want opt-outs after a few years. These are a lot of things that take time to negotiate. And so I don't think it's as simple as, 10 years, $350 million, take it or leave it. And he says, where do I sign? And the deal is done. I think that there's a lot more ins and outs that go into these enormous deals that just take a lot of time to negotiate. So I would be surprised, even though he's visiting teams this week, if he finds his deal, before the new year, and I would certainly be surprised if Harper does. As I said, Boris seems to operate on his own calendar, and very often that means he doesn't agree to a deal, or his players don't agree to a deal until January or February. So, that's sort of that's sort of my feeling on it, my guess, and we'll just have to kind of wait and see how it plays out.
All right, Scott Lauber, Phillies, obviously everybody's kind of watching them right now. The Flyers have made news. The Sixers are always seemingly in the news. The Eagles are back on the radar. Your move, Phillies. Scott Lauber, if something happens, we'll be all over it at Philly.com. Scott, thanks so much, pal.
Thanks, guys. Anytime.